Hi, and welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm Tammy Pham, CEO and co-founder of Intuitive Performance. I'm a performance coach, HR professional, whole person leadership facilitator, and your host. The Human Side of Business podcast is fueled by the genuine curiosity to understand how personal characteristics and skills can be leveraged to drive individual and team performance, tangible outcomes, and ultimately organizational success within business. Each podcast is devoted to sharing knowledge, expanding our learning edges, and exploring the trends in corporate culture towards growing the emotional intelligence of organizations. I'm so glad you're here. Hi, and a warm welcome to the Elevate Business podcast. Both myself, Tammy Pham, and Scott Russ are your hosts. We have the pleasure of introducing you to Tammy Pham, the COO at Pacific Geotech Systems. She holds an MBA from the University of Victoria and over 15 years experience in operations. Her experience includes creating and implementing digital transformation strategies for both private and public companies across North and South America. She has over 8 years in direct experience leading multi-million-dollar software development projects. She has conducted leadership training for over 10 years to improve strategic planning and execution in business. Welcome, Tammy. So tell me a little bit more about your background.
When I finished university, and at the time when I had all that business experience, I knew I wanted to venture out and be a business analyst, at least dabble into and figure it out if that's really what I want to do, because I felt that was a natural thing that I was passionate about.
Right.
So then I graduated university, knew I needed a change. I didn't want to stay in Calgary anymore because I had too much oil and gas experience. And I knew that if I wanted to go back to school to do my master's, I didn't want it to do it at University of Calgary because, again, it would still be very energy focused. And I knew I needed to expand at that time. So when I started to look at where I wanted to go to school to do my MBA, I looked on the East Coast, looked on the West Coast, and then I landed on University of Victoria. And the reason being is because their curriculum, they were the only one that I found which offered 2 opportunities to do consulting work, both in the local city, so in Victoria, and then also international experience as well. So at that time, you could choose to either go to India, China, or Brazil to do a consulting project as part of your capstone project in the curriculum. So I thought that was really interesting because I was like, how else am I going to get all this international experience, right? So I applied, I got in, long story short, I moved to Victoria, quit my job. And I was like, I'm going to kill this because I have such a strong resume. I can do that. And definitely way more confident than I should have been because the job market in Victoria was so different than Calgary.
Okay.
It was drastically different. So in Calgary, I would apply, and I was used to doing this. Like I'd apply, get the interview, knock it out of the park, and then I'd work, right? So then I was like, oh, yeah, I'd do the same thing in Victoria. No takers. And 2 things that I did. One is I applied specifically for business analyst role because I knew I could do it. The downside is I didn't have the position explicit in any of my jobs. Like I was never a business analyst, even though I was naturally doing it just because that's how my brain worked. So that was a downside for me. The other downside is that in the Victoria job market, it's who you know. Actually, BC in general, it's who you know and how do you build those connections. And then being new to Victoria, I didn't know anybody. And so I struggled really, really badly. I put my MBA on hold. I said, I have to figure out how I'm going to be able to support myself to actually go to school. So let's pause my admission for now. And I spent a year trying very hard to get a business analyst role because I was just so determined on being able to explore that role. But I couldn't get anything. And then I ended up doing a lot of random jobs just to support my living out here. I ended up doing like a management job at the mall. And a year passed and I was like, oh my gosh, Tammy, what did you do? You just quit a well-paying job You're not going to school because you can't afford it. Did you make the wrong decision? And so I was like, okay, I just have to, learn from my mistakes, go back to Calgary and start from the beginning. And so I was already planning my exit strategy. And then the month before I was actually about to move back, I got a call back. Got a call back from Pacific Geotech. They're like, Tammy, we want to hire you. I was floored. I was like, oh my gosh, okay, let's do it. And then during salary negotiations, I had a number in mind, and it was aligned with what I knew I was getting paid in Calgary because of my experience. And during negotiations, they were like, well, you know what, we believe in your confidence. We see maybe you can do it, but we don't know. And you don't have the role on your resume. So it's like, we're taking a chance on you too.
Right.
So I was like, okay, no, that's fair. But I was still very confident. And the number that they gave me for me was still too low. So I was like, you know what? I'll tell you what, why don't you cut my probation period from 6 months to 3 months? I have 3 months to show you that I can do it. And at that time, you're going to pay me what I'm asking for, and we'll go from there. And then my boss was like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah, if I can't do it in 3 months, fire me. Like, I can do it. And he was like, okay. And fast forward 3 months, I ended up being the lead business analyst on 5 major projects. I spearheaded the development and all of that. My boss was completely floored. He was like, I honestly didn't think you were going to make it. I'm so shocked that you took the learning curve and you just like knocked it out of the park. But I did a lot of work outside of that. Like, I did a lot of learnings to make sure that I would excel. So anyways, at the 3-month probation mark, what was really exciting, and this is where Pacific Geotech will always be near and dear in my heart. It's because fast forward to that time when we had the discussion, he was like, do you still want to do your MBA? And I was like, yeah, I don't know. It's really expensive. I've just spent a year struggling financially. I don't know if I really need it as part of this role. I want to make sure that I'm not just going to school for the sake of going to school. I want to make sure that this piece of paper is actually going to benefit in my career.
Right.
And so I just want to make sure. And he was like, you know what? We really value education. We are confident in your skills. You've done an amazing job. So we're going to pay for half of your MBA program, and we want you to do it. And I was I was so appreciative, and I was so grateful. So I started the MBA program right when the curriculum started for that next year. And so I was working full time and doing my MBA. And throughout that whole journey, I told them, I was like, by the time I'm finished the master's program, you're going to give me vice president of operations role. And he was like, okay, stop doubting me, because I proved him wrong at the very beginning. He was like, okay, this girl's crazy. Sure, whatever. But every year during my master's program, I would create strategy reports saying like, okay, these are the things that I feel we need to improve on. These are the things that I know we're doing well, and these are the things that we need to change. And I did that because even though I was still operating as a business analyst, I was working as if I was already vice president. And so by the time I finished the master's program, I was already implementing all of the strategy work that I was writing up for them. And then by the time I graduated, I was like, hi, remember what I said? And then they're like, yep. So then as soon as I got my master's, I was promoted to vice president. And then when we had that discussion, I was like, I'm gunning for COO, right? And he was like, okay. And then I was like, we're going to have this discussion in 2 years. As soon as I, solidify all the changes that I want operationally. And then you're going to give me that role. And so again, I proved myself, and then I got promoted as COO, and here we are today. So it's an amazing journey for me on multiple levels, because Pacific Geotech always gave me the room to develop where I needed to develop. and gave me the flexibility to determine what that looked like for me. So I was
Mm-hmm.
never, ever pigeonholed being like, no, you're hired as a business analyst. Why are you doing all these other things? So they gave me the autonomy to really drive my growth. And for me, being an overachiever and always thinking about the next step, that helped me really thrive. And at the same time, because I was always experimenting of like, okay, I'm thinking this would work. They also gave me the support to try those things out. And it was very agile in the sense of, okay, if we tried this out and it didn't work, and this is where I'm thinking we can improve, they gave me that flexibility to run with it. So again, like I would not be where I am today if it wasn't number one for them taking a chance on me, but then also at the same time giving me the space and giving me the autonomy and power to do what I firmly believed was for the success of the company.
Exactly. And there's so many interesting points in there, Tammy. Earlier, I written down competitive edge because I was really curious as to understand, okay, well, what was Tammy's competitive edge? But you've walked us through basically that journey as to, where you've come from to where you are today. And what kind of intrigues me is that oftentimes it appears or observing that you're internally driven. So you have your own basically project management style to yourself, where you identify your goals and areas for growth. From a performance perspective, it's like, okay, where am I elevating to the next level? What is the next step? And you forecast that, and then you almost visualize it as if you're there. And your actions follow that. So I'm really interested, how do you parlay those actions, habits, and thought processes to your team?
Ooh, good question. So my actions and way and how I want everything to be executed with the team, or my actions in terms of my growth?
How it impacts your team. So basically, so looking at it from more of a leadership style, as to, you have a very self-driven or self-motivation approach. And, how does that positively impact your team, or how do you mentor your team to operate in such a way? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because, from where Scott and I see from a coach approach perspective and evidence-based reports that we do with our clients, oftentimes they're externally motivated. Like there's another person or another portion of their environment that pushes them to do something or not. And so I'm curious to understand how you tick and how that impacts your team, because you're internally motivated. You have your own kind of marching to the own beat of your drum, proverbially.
Yeah, that's a really good question. For me, I'm a firm believer that if everybody knows what the mission is and they firmly believe in it as well, that would be the driver. So for me, it was like, okay, I am so passionate about the work that we do. I feel that it really drives. So we build software, and our main client is government, and our software helps regulatory agencies make sure that they're following their mandate. So when it comes to issuing permits for oil and gas, for example, our system allows them to make sure that engagement with First Nations, consultation with other stakeholders, business decisions are all transparent, and it facilitates that process. So because we offer that, I feel the contribution that we have to society is to make sure that, we're holding government accountable, but then also optimizing how they do work, because, it's like a traditional saying, government always moves slow. So how are we helping them move fast, right? So, so I feel that that's our contribution, but I'm so passionate about that. And where I'm going with this is two parts. Because I'm so passionate about it, and I really feel that the work that we're doing is making a difference, I share this with the team. I say, hey, you know what? This is what we do, but it goes way farther than that. The impact that we have is X, Y, Z. And so they are able to understand the overall mission of why we're doing what we're doing. The second part that I feel helps motivate them too is leading by example. So for me, I'm always like, I'm very transparent with the goals of the company, so they know where the company is going. And I'm also very transparent with my own goals as well. And I say, you know what, this quarter, these are the areas that I feel I can improve. These are the areas that I feel that as a company we can go. And I also give them the opportunity to give me feedback on where they feel I can improve, but also where the company can improve. So it's a 360 conversation. And I think what happens from that is it bonds the team on a level where they're like, okay, we're a family, we're a tribe, we're doing this together, we're working towards the same mission, and we have the internal support to like move in that direction. So it's almost like one unit. And I kind of relate this back to playing team sports, right? If you're on it, I played basketball. So if I'm on a basketball team and you have your point guard and you have all these other roles, how are you guys coming up with a play to make sure you're going to kill it that game? And so it's always that team approach for me, and ensuring like there's lots of transparency, lots of communication, and making sure that the team understands the overarching, like, why are we doing this? So you're not just coming here and doing a job, but it's like way more than that. So I think, at least from my perspective, that's always something that I felt was very important for me as a leader to communicate. And then when I heard feedback from the team too, it also reassured that I was doing the right thing, because they would tell me, I'm so glad you're telling me this, because I didn't know where the company was going. I didn't know what this was doing. I didn't see the bigger picture. So that just reaffirmed a lot of my assumptions. I hope that answers your question.
It certainly does.
Okay.
Yeah. And I find it intriguing again. Like I've kind of jotted down some notes as you were speaking to kind of keep myself in line with regards to the excitement that's coming out of this conversation, because you're bouncing in between, understanding self and personal leadership, and, how you can turn that into positive performance for your team, making sure that there's a solid line drawn between the mission of the company, the department's objectives and goals, and your expectations, and allowing team members to have a safe place to play, essentially, and provide feedback. There's a lot there. I can see Scott's getting excited about it as well. If you want to jump in, Scott, do so, please.
I tend to agree with everything you've said there, and to your point, Tammy, I mean, key themes I've heard around, making sure the mission is really being heard by the entire team, and kind of helping them bridge that gap between, hey, what I'm working on here, this is where it's having the impact. And the impact isn't just for our clients, but in the larger whole of scheme of things. And then coming back to that like two-way feedback and communication amongst the team, and trying to help everybody kind of collaborate together and better understand how to communicate and utilize feedback as a way of leveraging their skills. And so I'd be curious, kind of taking that step back a little bit more, how might you describe your kind of leadership style and the way that you help motivate your team?
Yeah, this one's always interesting for me to answer, because I feel like I'm a chameleon. And what I mean by that is I'm very situational. So for example, if I see the team dynamic is where they have the skill set, the direction, and the proper dynamic amongst them, I'll take a seat back and I'll let them run with whatever ideas they have, and let them take control of it. If I see a situation where either there's conflict or a consensus can't be reached, then in that scenario, I might be a little bit more direct, and I might use a little bit more authority so that we can move forward and not be stuck in this zone of analysis paralysis, right? But in general, when I think about my leadership style, I think I'm a combination. And I'm a combination of transformational leadership, where I love, and because I'm like this with myself, I love pushing my team outside of their comfort zone. Because when they past that level and I see the look in their eye where they're like, holy crap, I did it. Nothing excites me more than that. It's like, I love seeing when they can achieve their goals. And most of the time, they just need that little push. So for me, that's something that I'm very passionate about because I do it so much for myself. So that transformational leadership is one. And then the other one is strategic. So I'm always aware of, okay, there's a fine balance between letting the team do what they need to do to get things done, but then also keeping in mind what the high level objectives are. So I'm always in that zone of like, okay, play what you need to do, but then let's make sure that we're still moving forward to the corporate objectives that we want to hit. So I'm still like, zigzagging in between, but that's where the strategic part comes in to make sure that we're not going off too far, but still giving them that freedom and not being like, no, you guys need to stay in these 2 lanes. So a combination of a couple of things.
Yeah, I like where you're going with that because it sounds to me like you're quite adaptable. So chameleon to me means adaptable from a leadership perspective. And that's really important because it's not just one person type that shows up within your team, right? So that's fantastic that you organically identify with that. The other thing that came up for me is playing devil's advocate. So as humans, we all have this thing called ego, as I'm sure you're aware of. Tell us, like, through your leadership growth, how did you put your ego aside to receive constructive feedback or even criticisms from that 360 approach for the betterment of your department?
I love this question because I feel that I started this very young, very early in my career. So when I was, so every role that I did, even in Calgary, every role that I did, I always like fast tracked myself because I was like, on to the next thing. But because I did that, I knew early on that I can only do that if I'm not overly confident, because you can only grow when you know the areas that you need to improve on. So every role that I had, if my manager didn't provide it for me, I would go and bug them. I would say, hey, I just want to check in. How am I performing? Where do you see areas that I can improve? What are some things that I'm doing well and not so well? If I wanted to get this new role in 3 months, what does that look like for you? So because I was so adamant in getting that feedback, I was very used to getting used to not hearing I'm doing great. And I actually don't like hearing I'm doing great all the time. So I was like, no, there's more to it. Like, what, you have to tell me, like, how I can't be, there's always room for improvement. So because I always did that, when I started doing more leadership roles, I pried it out of my employees too, right? So a lot of times it can be uncomfortable for them because they're like, you're my boss. How can I tell you that you're doing something wrong? But I was always, I created this space where I was like, look, here are the things that I feel as a leader that I know I'm not doing right. Do you agree? And then we would have a conversation and I would pry it out of them. Because I think if you always hear you're doing well, even as a leader, you're not getting the truth, because there's always times where staff are probably unhappy with either a decision or the way things are going, or maybe they're just unhappy with something that you're doing. I always feel that there's always room there. And so if I didn't get it from them, I would make sure that I would pose it in a different question, or I would say like, oh, this project was very difficult because I noticed, the team was late with this, and I know that there's a little bit of friction. Let's talk about that more. How did you feel that went? And then from their discussions, I would say, how do you think we would do better? And then you'd start getting those little tidbits. Well, maybe we should have done this. And I was like, great. But then I'm getting the feedback of like, maybe it wasn't specifically me, but maybe as a management level, this is where we can improve. So,
right.
So to answer your question, I always framed it in a way where if they didn't tell me, I would move the discussion or frame it in a way where I can get that information. And I am a firm believer that you need to have those discussions, otherwise you can't grow. And that was something that I did very, very early on in my career. So I was already comfortable with being uncomfortable, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And I really enjoy your approach, because for you, it's genuinely not coming from a place of, am I doing good or bad, but rather, let's look at this project, or let's look at what's going on currently. I've observed this. So you're telling that individual it's okay to talk about that topic or subject or what's going on, but it's almost like a place of separation. So it's not me versus you. Tell me how good or bad I'm doing, but rather, hey, let's talk about this thing. And I've seen this. Can you validate or debate that for me? Like, tell me more about what you see from your seat, because your voice is important, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Where this leads me to, Tammy, is more curiosity from a performance perspective, because, it sounds to me like organically there's a great culture that's very transparent, inclusive conversation. So how do you take that a step further when it comes to things like performance programs, or those distinct conversations around that person and their performance from your end of it?
Yeah, I love this question too. So when we talk about growth, sometimes it's not for everyone, in the sense of like, not everybody knows what the next step is. And sometimes when they're comfortable in their role, which is okay too, when you're picking like, okay, what are some areas that you want to improve, or where are some skills that you want to, work on? Sometimes it's difficult for them to get to that point. And so when it comes to performance reviews, there's two categories. One is you have those players that are already on to the next thing and want your help to get them there. Or you have the other ones where maybe they're not too sure and they need a little bit more coaching, or they're okay being where they're at. But at the same time, you don't want staff to be complacent in that role too, because I think that also contributes to the growth of the company. If you have too many staff on your team that are okay, then your growth as a company also plateaus. So it needs to be a little bit of a mixture, and encouragement as well. So when it came to performance reviews, I was always keeping in mind, okay, is this a player who wants to get fast tracked? Is this a player that needs a little bit more coaching? Or is this a player that's kind of just complacent?
Right.
And then looking at it through that lens, we would start coming up with, how do we manage our talent? Does that mean we're going to get more resources to fill in the people who are getting fast tracked, getting more people in so that you can don't have too many complacent or kind of in the middle ground employees, so that we still grow the company? So I don't know if that answers your question or not. I think I just went on a tangent there.
That's okay. And I really enjoy where you're going, because what I'm hearing is that, you're not looking at fitting a square to a square when it comes to performance. You're looking at your team as talent. And yes, you have objectives, and yes, there's operational things that need to take place. But I'm hearing you, and I appreciate where you're coming from, because it's refreshing. More and more, we're seeing it in the sense of looking at that whole person and what they need. But I know when I was in management, oftentimes the school of thought was, we have operational goals, they need to be met. If they're not being met, then you need to have conversations with so-and-so, or guide other managers, being in the, the HR field, around, how to improve people, period. So I'm really enjoying the fact that you realize and embrace, out of the gate, it sounds like in your career, that we meet people where they're at. And one thing that I'm kind of curious about from, I guess, a tactical perspective, though, is sometimes meeting people where they're at doesn't fit organizational objectives. So
Correct.
How did you marry that in the sense of, consistently, or not consistently, but creating balance between operations and the performance of your people? Because sometimes they're not in alignment.
Yeah, and it's challenging for sure, because you can't force growth I don't think anybody would be happy with that. There's going to be a lot of friction. Like, oh, I just want to do it's like forcing, like teenagers to do the chores or something. And they're like, I don't want to do this. So it's definitely challenging. But at the same time, you're absolutely right. If they're not, so there's two levels to this. Either they're not operating at the level that they need to, or they're not moving with the company to where the company needs to go. So we would have those frank discussions. And I think, again, it comes back to being totally transparent. So I'd have conversations where it's like, we've had conversations. I understand where you're coming from. These are where you're operating. I'm going to tell you where we want all of our talent to be. So I always say, somebody in your role for this amount of years, and based on the projects that's coming, we want to see these skill sets. So maybe we'll have, like, let's say we have 5 skill sets and then we have different ranges. I would say, okay, so based on these skill sets and these ranges of junior, intermediate, senior, you're here. So let's say intermediate. So you're here, right? I'm not saying you have to be at senior, but with the new projects coming down the pipe and all of this, it would be awesome if we can get here. So the gaps that I see are X, Y, Z. Could we come up with a plan to start looking at what these look like? And then it would be more of a discussion. And then when they see it like that, like, oh, holy crap. Okay. I didn't realize I was operating at an intermediate when I thought I was a senior. Because that's sometimes the discrepancy too. They're like, I've been here for 10 years. I'm a total senior. And it's like, well, actually, let's take a look at this, right? And so maybe you're not so that's kind of like the gap in their self-assessment versus actually where they're operating. And then when you share, like, okay, these are all the new projects coming in. This is the new technology we need to start adopting. And they're like, oh, I see where I'm getting pushed. I get it. Okay. In order for me to actually thrive here, based on where we're going, I like the work that I'm doing. These are the things that I need to continue. So then they can start seeing it. And then they get excited to go to that movement. Not all conversations go that positive. So
we'll talk
I'm painting a pretty picture here, but it's not always the case. But yeah, ideally, that's kind of like the structure and the framework that I have, because a lot of the times it's like perception of self, and then also alignment of, like, going back to the why and the transparency of, what the company is doing and all of that.
I really enjoy that. And we have one last question for you, but prior to that, because I'm super curious and enjoying how open you are with regards to leadership in your team, Tammy. So we've also experienced the flip side of it, where team members are A players, like all superstars. They're eager to get things done, but do not know yet how to engage with their autonomy. Meaning, when it comes to setting their own goals and when it comes to kind of taking that step forward, be it fear, confidence, what have you, everybody's different. How do you empower your team members to not just think, but act proactively when it comes to their own performance?
So again, I'm a very big advocate of being transparent and sharing my own story. So, and I had such a strong story at Pacific Geotech, right? Like, I was able to create and carve out my roles that were just never there. I was like, you're going to create this for me. So at any time, and I have specific examples too, anytime somebody came to me and was like, you know what, I really want this role. These are the things that I'm struggling with, or these are the things that, I'm afraid of doing, or, I've tried it, but I didn't get the results that I wanted. So what do I do? And in all of those cases, I would find a story that was very similar in my experience. And I was like, hey, no worries. Like, this is what happened to me, but these are the steps that, maybe you can take to try it out. And so what would happen is we would have a bonding session where I would share my story, let them know that you're not alone. It's okay. This is a learning opportunity. And then I would suggest some key pointers, like, okay, if we were to do this again, based on what I'm hearing and how you have reflected on the situation. These are some key things that I think from my perspective could improve, right? So if they came to me and said, I had this situation, there's a little bit of tension, I would look at it and be like, okay, so maybe next time that happens, what if we tried this, right? And not coming at it being like I'm the expertise, but offering from my lens based on how they're sharing it, what are some tips and tricks that they might want to experiment with. So I was never coming at it from a place that I know what I'm saying and you should do this. I would always say, this is what I think. I don't know if it's going to work, but let's try it out. And if it doesn't, let's have another conversation. So it was always like a friend conversation at that point, because they're being vulnerable, right? It's always a sense of vulnerability. And so I always wanted to support that and create that safe space so they can have that conversation with me and then offer what I would feel could work and then have a follow-up session with them. And a lot of the times they would take the initiative and have the follow-up session with me, tell me how it went. And again, to see that excitement of being like, oh my gosh, I tried it and it was so awesome. And, now I'm trying this, and it just warms my heart because I'm able to pay back what I got. So that was one of the key things. I'm truly passionate about supporting others and not coming at it from a sense of like, I did it, you can do it too, because I'm so great. But it's more like, if I could do it, let me support you to get you there too, whatever your journey looks like. But your journey is not going to look like mine, but I'm going to be able to share my experience to help you get where you want to go.
That's fantastic, Tammy. And I really appreciate the theme that I've kind of noticed within your leadership style is taking that coach approach. It's not saying, hey, this is what I did, go do this too, but rather saying, sharing from experience and take away what you think might apply to yourself as well. And let's co-create this. Let's partner together and see how we can both work together to achieve what you're looking for, rather than making it a one-way conversation. And
you guys both rephrase everything that I say so beautifully.
So Angie and I actually
really
met
job.
through our coaching training program where we got certified. That's where we met. So that's part of our coaching background, I guess, is helping synthesize some of the ideas.
Oh, I love it. I'll go on this huge rant, and at the end I'm like, did I even answer the question? And then you guys summarize, and I was like, man, beautiful, yeah.
There you go.
Teamwork at its finest.
Yeah. And I know we could likely go for another half hour here, but looking to kind of bring things to a close, we'd love to hear, and we always ask our guests, what are 3 words of inspiration that you would like the world to hear?
I'll share 3 words, or actually it's more than 3 words, but I'll share what my mentor told me at the very beginning. And I have always used it. Begin with the end in mind. So when you know where you want to go, you're going to have clarity on how you're going to get there. And every decision that I made in my life with my career, I use that as a measuring tool. Yeah. Begin with the end in mind.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that insight. We're going to have to write that mantra down for sure. Where's the best place for our listeners to connect with you, Tammy?
Probably LinkedIn. LinkedIn probably be best, or email.
Fantastic. So we want to thank you so much for joining us today. And we really appreciate you sharing your business insights with Intuitive Performance and our subscribers.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys too. I had a blast. It was really great. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure. And for those who would like to learn more about Pacific Geotech Systems, we're going to provide a link to the company profile on the Elevate Business podcast page. Take good care.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for listening to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm glad you could join us. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay updated with our latest content, make sure to visit our website. The link can be found in the episode description, where you can subscribe to the podcast, sign up for our newsletter, and learn more about our whole person leadership services. Sounds interesting? Explore the Whole Person Leadership Cohort by Intuitive Performance, a unique program that offers unparalleled support to managers on every step of their leadership journey. Our program features evidence-based assessments, workbooks, group coaching, and interactive learning experiences to help you level up your leadership skills. Reach out today to apply to one of our upcoming cohorts. Until next time, take care and stay curious.